obligations that they have. We literally have to change our development pattern to become far more financially productive. So what's the solution? I used to have people who would stand up, because we're going to talk for the next 3 hours about the things that we do. Nobody even laughed at that at all. You all thought I was serious, didn't you? we're going to talk the rest of the time about the things we do to try to address this. And I would get to the end, and someone would stand up and say, well, Chuck, you've given us all this doom and gloom, but you haven't told us what the solution is. I want a solution to this problem. Give me a solution. And I was really perplexed, because we're going to spend a lot of time here talking about some of the things that we can do to deal with this. And I was hearing this, and I was like, there's something I'm missing here. It took me a while to figure out that I was hearing the question wrong. I was hearing, what is the solution? And what was really being asked is this: what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing? I don't know of any such solution. And I don't, I step back and I look at where we're at, and I see that we have created a complex set of problems that really are unsolvable, in the sense that, we can somehow come through this gracefully and unscathed, and then everybody as smiley, happy people. We're going to go through a difficult transition, trying to find something that works post this experiment we've been on. So instead of talking about solutions as if there's some way to solve this problem, what we really need to talk about are rational responses. How do we as a collective people at the local level take stock of the situation that we're in and start to respond to it rationally over time? I always start with this photo here when we talk about rational responses. This is my hometown. This is Brainerd, Minnesota, back in 1894. Brainerd, Minnesota today. Has anybody ever been to Brainerd, Minnesota? All right. 2 of you. Nice. Brainerd's like 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is the middle of the woods. This is the middle of nowhere. Back in this day, this was really the middle of nowhere, right? This was multiple days' journey from anything that you would consider civilization. These people were not highly trained engineers, planners, architects, designers. These were literally a bunch of lumberjack, illiterate hicks in the middle of nowhere, right? But look at the place that they built. I mean, as an engineer, as a planner, if I get all geeky on you, I start to look at this and say, this is just spectacular. I look at the buildings, the way they're laid out and lined up, the way they frame the public realm, the way the space is segmented, the buildings themselves, the great symmetry that they have, the nice definition of, bottom, middle, top, the ornamentation. This is a fantastic, fantastic design and layout. We would kill to have something like this today, really. Let me ask you some questions. An illiterate group of lumberjacks in the middle of the North Woods, how thick was their zoning code? How many, code enforcement officials did they have? How many plans, how many commissions and committees did they have to go to in order to build something? How many community visioning sessions did they hold? How much tax increment financing did they give out? How many federal and state subsidies and grants did they access? If you go through the litany of things that we have come to see as normal for creating growth and development and prosperity at the local level, these people had none of them, none whatsoever. Yet they built pretty fantastic places. How do they know how to do this? It's really simple. They just looked at what they knew worked. They literally looked around and said, what worked? And they just copied that. They copied what, for thousands and thousands of years, had worked. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn from these people. And a little bit of what I'm going to do tonight is kind of help you see some of those. By the way, this street looks like this today. Yeah, it's a wasteland of, you know, parking and vacant buildings. If you want to understand in a snapshot why all of the cities in America are broke, this picture. There's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that street. What is our return on that investment? Nothing. Nothing. Our cities are full of places like this, where we have millions of dollars in the ground, and it's getting us nothing. We can't continue to build like that. So at Strong Towns, we've got 4 areas that we're focusing on for a rational response. Building cultural awareness is the first one. The idea that, you know, as counterintuitive as it may be, because we're really focused on growth, 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 that growth is not the answer, but productivity is. And so what we're doing is things like this Curbside Chat. We have a website where we're sharing a ton of information to try to help people understand that we need to change this narrative at the local level. The second, muster social capital, I'm going to talk about at the end tonight, the idea that not only do our elected leaders have a role to play here, but everybody who wants their places to be successful has a role to play. Restructure economically, the idea that we, you know, can no longer continue to be the modern version of mercantilism, where we, you know, ship out things, have them finish somewhere else, and then ship them back and call that an increase in GDP when we're doing it all on borrowed money. We literally need to restructure economically. But the fourth one is what I want to focus on here tonight, the idea that we need to reorient government and reshape the way our local governments work. Build it and they will come. Amazing plot for a movie, right? A cornfield in Iowa, baseball, it's got everything, right? It's a terrible economic development strategy. We have evolved as a people to look at build it and they will come as a normal function of government. Yet, even in this suburban experiment, even this post-World War II experiment we're on, the build it and they will come mentality is really a late variant of that experiment. You could go back 20, 30 years and we didn't go out and build huge amounts of stuff hoping that growth would somehow materialize. This is something that we've kind of slid into as we become more and more desperate to keep it all going. Our ancestors, and I say ancestors in the largest sense of the word, you know, worldwide, never used a build it and they will come mentality. They built things incrementally over time. This is Front Street in my hometown back in 1870. This is about a block from the railroad, about 1,000 feet from the Mississippi River. You literally have these lumberjacks have gone out, chopped down some wood, planed some trees, popped up some storefronts, and got you know, the start of a little city. You've got a billiard hall here. You've got a restaurant here. I'm sure there was a brothel in there somewhere. You know, you had everything that was you'd find in a little frontier town in the middle of nowhere. We built thousands of these across the country, and a large percentage of them failed. They just went away. And when they went away, it didn't take down the international banking system. It didn't, you know, bankrupt states and local governments. It didn't create this cascading effect where all of a sudden, you know, we need to mobilize and spend trillions of dollars to prop it up. They just literally went in, you know, plucked the glass and the ironwork out of here and moved on to the next town that was successful. There was very little at risk here. It was a small incremental improvement. But some places, like my hometown, actually prospered. Some places, for whatever reason, took. And 30 years after this, you had a street that looked like this. This is the picture I showed you a few minutes ago. This is the exact same street 30 years later. Now, you're not seeing some huge build it and they will come investment. Nobody went in here and said, we're going to have the city of Brainerd, so let's put millions of dollars into infrastructure, and hopefully we can get all these lumberjacks to move here from around the country and locate here. Nobody did anything like that. What they did is they all incrementally built on this broad frame over the course of many, many decades. It was slow and incremental over time. And of course, you know, this increment of growth was very successful, but it was nothing like the next increment of growth. You know, you went from little shacks to 2- and 3-story wooden structures to now the same street having concrete and brick, you know, and granite facades. Incremental growth over a long period of time can do amazing, amazing things. This is the pattern of how we built. Now, if you talk to an engineer will tell you this is not very efficient. If you look at this, to go from here to here, we would have had to re-dig up the street. We would have had to put the line in again. Then when we go to this point, we got to redo the sidewalks. It's such a pain in the neck. It would be better to just go out and do it all at once, do it really cost effectively, do it really efficiently, right? Get it all done at once. That's a great idea, right? This is less efficient. It is more resilient. When you build incrementally, yes, the per unit cost is greater, but your financial strength and resiliency is far greater. And the thing that we all kind of intuitively understand as well is when you do this and you have this sunk cost, 20 years from now, we'll do anything to get growth here, right? We'll do anything. We'll let storage sheds and strip bars and whatever come in out there because we need growth bad, right? When it's a sunk cost. When we build like this, what we find is that we need to add value and create valuable space before the public then follows with that increment of investment. And that's the key here. Let's talk about the way government needs to invest. Most local government investments need to be secure and essentially risk-free. And we call this the banker mentality. If you go to the bank and you want a $100,000 loan, and you say, I saw these other people in this other city do this, and it looked like it worked, and things are happening there, and, sure, I'll pay you back. It's all good. What is the banker going to say? The banker's going to say, I want some collateral. I want you to have some skin in the game. I want you to ensure me that I'm not going to lose any money. As stewards of the public purse, we need to have this banker mentality. When we're going to put investments out there, they need to be secure and they need to be risk-free. We need to make sure that we're getting the public's money back. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no room for speculative ventures. There certainly is. But for those, we need a venture capital mentality. I'm going to show you at the very end tonight what the venture capital mentality looks like. But let's just say, at the outset, that speculative investments need to be small and experimental. We have to stop being essentially the dumb money at the table, which is a lot what our local governments have become. If you can't get a project to work and you try all these things, what do? You go to the local government and say, will you make up the difference for me? Will you give me the incentive? Will you give me the financing? Will you support this or back this? We need to become more prudent. And let me show you what this looks like. This is how we do projects today. There's an investment made. The investment to undertake a project creates jobs. That adds to the tax base. There's growth. And we get some measurement of activity that takes place. And if you look and if you read like the articles about a project, they'll report it exactly like this. We're spending $10 million and there's going to be $40 million of economic growth that happens, right? We see this all the time. And you read it and you're like, wow, 10 for 40, that's a really good return. The government spends 10 as a 4 multiplier. That's wonderful. Here's the problem. This money here is the government's, right? It's ours. It's taxpayer money that's used to finance this growth. What is this? That's money in the private sector. Now, I'm a private sector guy. I think the private sector should be doing more than it does, okay? But to say this to this is growth is just not real. That's not a real accounting for the government. What we really need to ask the question, when we're talking a real return on investment, is how much of what happens over here ends up back over here? Because literally, if we want to repeat this cycle over and over again, in other words, if we want to be investing money and have that money grow and return and be able to come back and do this again, this has to even out. Our return on investment is not here to here. Our return on investment is here to here. When we look at it that way, we get a whole different paradigm of how government grows and develops and how government can invest for prosperity. Because really, if we're not doing this, if we invest here and it comes back here and it's a fraction of that, how many times can we continue to do that? That's our problem today. There's a second problem that we have to work through in the way we do investments, and it has to do with the second life cycle. You know, when I went to engineering school, I had a class called Engineering Economics. And in engineering economics, they teach you how to do present worth analysis. Essentially compare one project to another by putting the costs and everything into present dollars. So you have an upfront cost, you have annual maintenance costs, and then you have this thing at the end called salvage, where essentially when the project is done, when everything is done and it's used up, you go out and you salvage what you can, and that has a certain value at the end of the project, okay? And the way you do a present worth analysis is you take all those components and you turn them into present dollars. So a dollar today is worth more than, you know, $10 of salvage 20 years from now, right? Here's the problem with that. The salvage idea works really well if you're Walmart. You know, and I've talked to the Walmart people who build and finance Walmarts, and they say, you know, a Walmart is pro forma is 12 years long. And after 12 years, the store, you know, in order for them to do it, the store needs to be paid off within 12 years. And at the end of 12 years, they can step back and look and say, you know, do we continue to operate this store in this location, or do we salvage this store and, you know, move a mile or two up the road to a different spot? Do we go in and rip out the light fixtures and the shelving and all that and, you know, use it somewhere else? That's the concept of salvage. How easy is it to salvage a road? When we get to the end of the useful life of your street, does the city get to go out and say, you know what, there's a better street up the road, we're just not going to maintain yours anymore? When the pipe goes bad, do we get to step back and say, you know, that whole investment didn't work out real well for us with that pipe, we're just not going to do that one anymore? No. We make an obligation when we take on that liability that we will make good on it for generations indefinitely. When we do an analysis that says, you know, at the end of the life cycle of this project, we have a salvage value, what we're not calculating is that the instant after that salvage value, we actually have a replacement cost, at a replacement cost that is enormous. We never factor that in. We never even stop to ask what that is. If you look at the way we put together projects, and you know, I have for years did engineering work where I worked for an engineering firm, and we would go and do interviews. And in the interviews, they would always ask us, how good are you at funding? How good are you at getting the federal and state government to do grants? And how good are you at working with the DOT to get their funding? And, you know, how good are you at putting together a project? And then when I worked for cities, I would often be asked to sit on these interview committees where we would be interviewing, you know, new city administrators, and they would always get more points if they had been able to successfully put a project together, right? Can you work the grant programs and do this and do that to get a project? So this is kind of our obsession at the local government level. We go out and we say, we got a project to do. Let's get the federal government, let's get the state government, let's get the private sector, and let's pool these resources, and then we'll kick in a little bit of ours at the end, and we'll do this project. And the project will create growth, and that will make us all better off. Here's the problem. When you get to the second life cycle, in other words, when everything's done, and then you got to go out and fix it, the federal government is not interested in helping you fix that broken sidewalk. The state is not, you know, interested in going out and repairing that pipe. That's you. That's us. That's us at the local level. That's our responsibility now. So implicitly, what we are saying when we agree to do a project or when we go forward with something is that all of the, you know, value contributed here can be made up in the growth of the tax base in the second life cycle. Because, you know, what's left when we get to the second life cycle? Just Mayor Quimby, you know, just us. So the growth that we get over that, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, that first life cycle has to be sufficient enough to make up for all of that money that we're not going to have the second life cycle. We never do this, never. And one of the critical reasons why our cities are all broke is that this is not part of the calculus. It needs to be. A cash flow analysis is not sufficient. if we're going to do public projects, we have to account for the second life cycle. And I told this to the mayors a couple hours ago when I met with them, because I wanted them to be ready to be startled when they actually sit down and do this. None of the projects that we do today make sense when you look at the second life cycle. That doesn't mean this analysis is wrong. It means the projects we're doing don't make financial sense. Let me show you what a high return investment looks like. Because as cities, we literally need to focus our resources on the places that have the highest return for us. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left we've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right we've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you see they're just a block apart. They abut the exact same highway. They abut the exact same neighborhood. They're the same size. They're the same land area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure. Everything about them is the exact same, except for the style of development. In the old and blighted block, you have a style of development that looks like this. It's literally old and blighted. This was stuff that was built prior to the Depression. Not really anything happened since. It's just stagnated. You've got a bail bonds, a pawn shop, a couple of liquor stores, one of those barber shops where you can still get the flat top. This is like your lowest value commercial block in town. Up the street then, you have the shiny and new. This is the drive-through taco joint. And the drive-through taco joint was people were so happy to get this because they got rid of a block that looked like this and replaced it with this. The city planner was happy because it met the floor area ratios, had all the parking that was needed. The sign met the sign code. The engineer was happy because now there's no more on-street parking, so the highway flow will be better, and the accesses are off the side here, so it stays out of that traffic stream. We even had the environmental people show up, and they were happy because these guys put native plants in the stormwater area over here. And the Complete Streets people were happy because they agreed to put in a sidewalk here. The sidewalk ends right there, but there's a sidewalk, along this property. Here's what nobody stopped to look at. If you look at that old and blighted block, there's a total value of $1.1 million. When you add up the value of all those properties, that's what the assessor has. That's the proportionate of what the city gets in tax revenue every year. If you look at that shiny and new block, the same size area, the same public infrastructure, the same everything, just a different style of development, is a total value of only $800,000. The old block is worth 42% more. Understand what you're looking at. In that old and blighted block, you were looking at the traditional development pattern, the way people built places for thousands and thousands of years. But you're looking at it in its most decrepit, rundown condition. It literally could not get any worse than this. It's not going to get any lower value than this unless we start tearing down buildings, right? Yet that decrepit condition outperforms this, on its wedding day, right? I mean, it's never going to look nicer than that, right? We all know what a taco joint looks like 30 years after it's put in, right? 30 years after it's put in, at some point it will become a used car lot when the new taco joint opens up on the, a mile away. And then, that will eventually be boarded up and someone will be selling drugs out the back, right? We know the life trajectory of that taco joint. What you have here in the traditional pattern of development is an approach to building that is very financially productive. And not only is it financially productive, it has a high upside and a very limited downside. When you look at the suburban experiment pattern of development, this post-World War II innovation, and the theories that we've applied about how to build places, what you see is a development pattern that is very fragile, has limited upside, but downside potential is to zero, and even less if it becomes really blighted and you've got to go tear things down. That's what is going on in our cities. And if we're looking for high return investments, we can focus on those places with traditional development patterns because they pay back enormously. It doesn't cost that much to make them work, and they pay back enormously. But let's go out to the edge of the city. This is what's gone on the periphery of our city in this experiment. This is the Mills Fleet Farm complex. Mills Fleet Farm is a kind of regional big box in the Midwest. Mills Fleet Farm, if you want to imagine what Mills Fleet Farm's like, you can think of like lawn care products, lumber, tires, bait and tackle, minnows, camouflage lingerie. There's a whole like mix of there's a whole mix of things. Think of like a Bass Pro meets Home Depot, right? That's Fleet Farm. Fleet Farm was so successful that they doubled the size of their building. So this is a huge, huge big box store. You've got the auto dealership right here, and then this is a gas station. This is all 13 acres within this complex. This is the highest value investment on this corridor. The Mills site is kind of the premier place. If we could get another Mills, the city would do anything to attract another Mills. We analyzed this 13 acres and found that it has a total value of $0.6 million per acre. Nothing to sneeze at. I mean, this is a substantial investment, substantial amount of money, $0.6 million per acre. We then took this exact same area, 13 acres, and we overlaid that in our old downtown. Now, for those of you that have seen the movie Fargo begins with scenes of Brainerd's downtown, okay? This is not a great place. In my lifetime, the only development that has happened has been by fire. These places burned down when I was in junior high. They're now a parking lot. This place burned down when I was in high school. It's now a parking lot. This place over here burned down when I was in college. It's now a parking lot. So the only investments that have happened in my lifetime have been buildings burned down, we clear out the rubble, and we turn them into parking lots. There's a meth lab that shows up every 6 months or so. This is not a great place, right? The same size area, a different style of development, has a value of $1.1 million per acre. It's 78% more. Again, look at what you're looking at. The best of the post-World War II development pattern. The highest yielding, most productive. You can go up and down this highway corridor. You can't find anything that is anywhere near as close to as valuable, either on a total size or on a per acre basis as this. Yet it is dwarfed by this wrecked, run down, nasty place in the downtown. Yes. Yes. Yep. Total value. There's 134 properties here. When you add them up, the value on a per acre basis is greater than the value you get here on a per acre basis by 78%. It's not even close. Again, very high upside, limited downside. Very limited upside and fragile on the downside. Let me point out one other thing too. Let's pretend that everybody walks out of here tonight and they get the central concept that we're talking about. The concept that the problem we have in the United States, especially at the local level, is not a lack of growth, but a lack of productive growth. And we go home and we say, you know what? We want to work to make